Good day, Junior Techies, and welcome to this video where we're going to be looking at worksheet question 1 for population ecology for grade 11s. My name is Mr. P. I'm taking you through this section, and hopefully we can build on your current understanding and then help you with a little bit of exam technique in preparing for your final examinations. Okay, so we're going to look at a typical question 1 here, and that's of our worksheet, where we're going to approach this question by looking at the way that the question is asked. So we see here that this is our typical write A only, B only, both A and B type question, or none. So we're going to select options in column 2 that match the description in column 1. And I've done the first one for you very quickly here. So our question here says, kittens competing for their mother's milk. Now, if we look at species and the way we have species compete, we refer to inter-specific competition or intra-specific competition. So inter means between species, and intra refers to within the same species competition. So if we look at the example given, kittens competing for their mother's milk, would this be between different species or within the same species? So we can eliminate option A because it is not inter-specific competition, but rather intra-specific competition. So we're looking at answering this question as B only. If we look at question 1.1.2, one of the species benefits and the other is unaffected. So now we're looking at a type of symbiosis that exists between species, where one species benefits and the other is unaffected. This is a typical example now of commensalism, because a mutualism that we've just eliminated is where both species benefit from the relationship that exists in their symbiosis. If we look at question 1.3, organisms have overlapping niches and compete for the same resources, but they coexist because they use the resources slightly differently. Now, if we look at the nuance in this question here, there's typical, or there's a very typical terminology that is using here. So here we're looking at uses, or there is use of the resources slightly differently. So we're referring to the same resources, but we are using them slightly differently. Temporal, if you see in option B there, refers to time. So there's no time partitioning, but rather resource partitioning, because it is the resource that is being used slightly differently. Therefore, our option here is A only. If we look at question 1.1.4, an example of social organization that increases the chances of survival. A type of social organization that increases the chances of survival. Now, if we look at our options that we're given, division of labor in bees, that improves survival, and also a herd of zebra that stay together is going to improve chances of survival as well. So in this case, question 1.1.4, it's both A and B. Right. Let's now look at some terminology type questions in question 1.2. So these can all be found in the worksheet that has been uploaded for population ecology as well. If you haven't yet received or got the worksheet, please make sure you get your hands on it. These are some great questions that will help you prepare well for your final exam. So question 1.2 here, if we read the question carefully, says we're looking for a biological term for the descriptions that are given. And we're going to write only the term next to the question number. So question 1.2.1, a pattern of relationships amongst individuals that benefits the society. If we look at question 1.1 now, this typically describes a social organization, okay, within a society. Question 1.2.2, method of determining a population size by counting the individuals in a representative sample area. Here we're going to be looking at simple sampling in determining population size. So there's the answer, 1.2.2, simple sampling. 1.2.3, competition for resources between individuals of the same species. So now there's a big deal being made of the same species. So our answer here to 1.2.3 is going to be intra-specific competition. Now we don't have to write the word competition because competition is given in the question, so the mark will be awarded here for the word intra-specific. If we look at 1.2.4, a coexistence of different species living in the same habitat by using resources differently. This is very similar to the question we got in the first question, 1.1, where we had to look at the A and B's and whether column 2 applied to, or should I say column 1 applied to both of the options in column 2 or not. So here the coexistence of different species living in the same habitat by using resources differently. So here we can relate again to resource partitioning, just as we did in the previous question. It's just a different way of asking that same bit of theory. 1.2.5, a symbiotic relationship in which one organism benefits and the other one is unaffected. Also very similar to a question we had to answer previously, and our symbiosis here we're looking at being the commensalism. 1.2.6, the death of individuals in a population. One word describes this, and that is mortality. 1.2.7, countries with a characteristic high birth rate and decreased life expectancy. This is typical of a population graph that would look something like this, and that is going to be typical of a developing country or developing countries. 1.2.8, a group of organisms of the same species occupying a particular habitat and having the ability to interbreed randomly. If we look here, we're talking about a population. So this is the description of a population as a group of organisms. 1.2.9, the inherent ability of a population to increase by birth. Now, increasing by birth, we're talking about natality. So it's sort of it's the opposite there to question 1.2.6's mortality. If we look at 1.2.10, the tendency of a certain species to defend an area within a habitat that they occupy against any type of intruder. Here we're looking at territoriality. Right. So there's a bit of terminology here for this section, and this section is pretty dominated by our terminologies, how we refer to different species, looking at specific definitions. So don't neglect this as part of population ecology. It makes up quite a large part of how these questions are going to be asked in your final exams. So Junior Techies, thanks so much for joining me here. We've done 2 questions in this first video. If you haven't yet, get a hold of that worksheet. As I've said before, there's some great questions for you to practice to make sure that you are going to be ready for your final exam at the end of the day. Do join me again, and thanks for joining today.